in a straight direction.
Right. Appreciate it. Thank you. Can I ask someone to help me with the slides? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. I didn't know that committing to an 18 to 22 minute speech would be such a big pain in the neck. But it clearly is. So Roy, don't fault me too much on my audience engagement or eye contact because I physically can't really maintain contact with each and every one of you. Nonetheless, I'm just going to call it the Batman effect because much like Batman, I'm having real trouble moving my neck around today. Jokes aside, let's talk about something that is very serious business. How many of you have heard of Malaysia? How many of you have heard of the 1MDB product or project that launched in Malaysia a few years ago? Everyone. That's great. 1MDB stands for Malaysian Development Berhad. 1MDB. And that's the cue to change the slide. Thank you. Appreciate it. It was a project that was meant to help bolster the economy within Malaysia. It was a means to engage their tourism, real estate, energy, and agri-business by the then Prime Minister of Malaysia. They hired a bank by the name of Goldman Sachs. I'm sure all of you have heard of Goldman Sachs before. And together, they advised on the launch of 3 bond offerings between the years 2012 and 2013, earning them a fees of a whopping $600 million. As for the bond offerings itself, they clocked in $6.5 billion. That's a lot of money to energize sectors that they were hoping to bolster earlier on. But later it was found out that more than 2.7 billion was embezzled from the 1MDB Sovereign Wealth Fund. It was used to bribe both Malaysian as well as Abu Dhabi governments and buy luxury goods. How many of you are big fans of Leonardo DiCaprio? How many of you know that he was nominated 6 times before he won an Oscar? There was in fact a running joke about how Leo is the lucky charm for every other actor nominated in his category. He held his Oscar for The Revenant second because the first Oscar he actually received was a gift from the guy, the mastermind behind the 1MDB scandal, Joe Low. So as a part of the guilty plea and the charges that were levied on both the government officials as well as Goldman Sachs, they admitted that the chairman of Goldman Sachs himself misappropriated about $50 million, Tim Lesner, and was deceiving not just the Malaysian government but Goldman Sachs as well. And our alleged mastermind, Joe Low, the one who was presenting Leonardo DiCaprio with his Oscar way before the jury, was involved in all of these deals. He told that he was hiding all of this from the compliance program within the bank, and this was something that was embedded within the culture at Goldman Sachs at that given point in time, especially in their APAC divisions. As a part of an effort to acquire and execute these transactions, the compliance officers were constantly deceived. They were not told of Joe Low's involvement in the deal, even though he was declared an undesirable client just a few years ago. In this instance, he was working as a third-party agent, which is different from being a client. Joe Low is now facing many US criminal indictments. About $700 million of his assets have already been seized. This includes luxury yachts, paintings, and other awards that he'd purchased off of actors before. He's nowhere to be found currently. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about what may have happened to him, where he might be, and how he's currently doing. Even within Singapore, we felt the aftermath of the 1MDB scandal. In fact, 2 private banks lost their licenses. 8 other banks were fined a total of $21 million US. Some bankers even faced jail time for their involvement in the money laundering efforts. The then Malaysian Prime Minister was accused to be in the thick of things. Both him and his spouse were said to have been in the know-how and in fact were to be facilitators of this entire scandal. He was voted out in 2018. He's emerged back into the political scene, as a lot of you might know. And at that point in time, he was sentenced to 12 years in jail, along with a hefty fine of $49 million. I'm sure you remember from the news back then, the number of bags and jewelry that were found off of his spouse that created quite the news waves. Goldman has settled with the Malaysian government, a settlement worth $3.9 billion. This includes a $2.5 billion cash payout, as well as $1.4 billion in the way of guarantees from the money that they would recover from the scheme. Furthermore, they settled with the Department of Justice for another $2.3 billion, clocking in $5.9 billion in fines. That's a huge amount. We all look at these numbers without context, because the truth is that this is money that's taken away from the pockets of people who could have used it to improve their lives, to improve their lifestyle, to come out of poverty. Think about the sectors that the 1MDB project was hoping to bolster: agriculture, tourism, energy, real estate. Beyond big business, this was meant to serve the man on the ground. There are real world consequences to us bankers not doing our due diligence or working ethically. And this takes me back to a conversation I had with my boss the first time I joined the bank. I'm a marketing and psychology student, by the way, nowhere close to the function that I currently serve, which is anti-financial crime. Circumstances led to me joining the function and starting right at the bottom. I initially worked on gifts and entertainment. So I'd probably be approving that Oscar trophy to Leonardo DiCaprio if I was sitting within Goldman Sachs at that point in time. And so I asked my boss, some of the gifts that we process are like mooncakes, or festive offerings. What kind of risk are we actually controlling for? Does our work actually have any impact? Do we actually make a difference? He sat me down and he said that those are very good questions to ask. But there are other questions I should be asking of myself. A small lapse today, a small error, a small under-the-table gift offering, which probably wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things, could lead to a bigger gift offering tomorrow, then an even bigger one. And soon there'd be a culture of such under-the-table dealings, of such unscrupulous behavior, which don't have any real-world consequences. Who is the victim? It's a victimless crime. And that's what we're trying to prevent. Create a culture where such practices, such happenings never manifest. And that gave me a sense of value, a sense of appreciation for the task of the job that I had at hand. But when we have such major occurrences, beyond self-reflection, it's important to also reflect as an organization. How would we stack up to such risks if they were to come knocking at our door? Let's answer that question by clicking on the next slide. Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. We first analyzed what were the failures within Goldman Sachs. We realized that there were certain employees that were actively involved with both the bribery and corruption element of the scandal, but also the money laundering. In fact, there was a committee called the Firm-Wide Capital Committee, which included business intelligence units within the bank, and they were in the know-how of the deal as well as involvement of Jolo, and were able to escape the eyes of their compliance program. So when we scrutinized their control failures, we first identified that even though employees serving these control functions had strictly labeled Jolo as an undesirable client, he was still able to be involved in the capacity of a third party. They voiced their suspicion to members of the deal team, but accepted their denial of his involvement as confirmation that he was in fact not involved with any of these transactions. Therefore, they failed to identify Jho Low's involvement in these deals. We asked ourselves, what controls do we have against the involvement of such shady characters? We found out that we have policies and procedures, systems and controls specifically dedicated to mitigating risks that are posed by BDCs, which stands for Business Development Consultants, much like Jho Low, vendors, joint ventures, and we annually review our contracts, our dealings with these third parties. We have certain trigger points in our dealings with such third parties, wherein if the deals or the transactions are to hit these triggers, then they are automatically come in for review. So not only do we have a periodic review system, but we have a trigger-based review system as well, to ensuring that any new risk outside of a cycle is also captured and evaluated and then taken care of. We also have awareness training with DCOs, with managers and other related parties to educate them on what these triggers might be and when in fact they are to sound in the alarm bells. But we also recognize that there are opportunities for us to enhance. And I say this now mincing my words given that group audit is evaluating me today. So he might come knocking and finding, so I'm not going to be sharing these slides with you. But nonetheless, we are undertaking a project. In fact, we closed it out recently on the ABC controls framework, which includes the onboarding and monitoring of such third parties like business development consultants, like vendors, distributors, so on and so forth. And we have also expanded our framework to include risks such as AML and sanctions, AML standing for anti-money laundering. The other control failure that we identified was that they were able to raise more than 6.5 billion US dollars without in fact investigating what these funds were going to be used for. In fact, sometimes it was staring right at their faces that there was something unscrupulous about. Why would you have a second offering within a few months of raising $1.75 billion in the first offering? Clearly, they should have identified what this money was being put used to and have a system of accountability to ensure that it was being used for the right reasons. That was in fact not the case. And as a consequence, the use of the bond proceeds and the subsequent money laundering was in fact undetected by the control functions within the bank. So let's juxtapose that to what we have in DB. We actually have a system for proving new products and transactions that includes several layers of governance and many teams that sit not just within AFC but beyond. Some of them, just to name a few, are business line, anti-financial crime, sanctions and embargoes, anti-fraud, bribery and corruption, non-financial risk management, risk compliance, legal, tax, finance, treasury. Those are a lot of support functions dedicated to ensuring that we manage such risks within the bank. So we were just talking about how the business sometimes submits things at the last minute deadlines. More often than not, these are often in conflict with these support functions. And as a bank, while we're trying to make money, we're also trying to ensure that we're making this money ethically and above the law. We've also identified and incorporated some high-risk factors, such as transactions with foreign governments, the use of third parties as a part of the Department of Justice's guidance within our compliance program, and their checks and balances in place, which I'm sure at some point Roy will audit sometime later next year. The risk assessment is done periodically, and again, this is cyclical but also trigger-based to strengthen existing controls and wherever need be, close gaps that we have identified. There's also an ongoing discussion with the ABC team globally and the BLAFC team, the business line anti-financial crime team, to enhance the control effectiveness across the new product approval process that we currently have going. The fifth and sixth control failures within Goldman Sachs was the failure to trace criminal wrongdoing by monitoring internal call records, emails, and other correspondences between employees that were involved within the deal team, as well as the disparity in the implementation of due diligence between employees. These were some senior folks dealing with some serious transactions who should have been monitored a lot more diligently to ensuring that they were doing things which were in fact above board. There are many systems in place to detect and prevent ethical misconduct and incentives for upholding ethical standards within DB. Many employees have to go on mandatory time away And that's when a lot of these checks and balances are in fact put in force. You have employee compliance that goes through a lot of our correspondences to ensure that things are in fact above board. We also have hotlines available for people who might feel that escalating their concerns to their immediate managers might in fact intimate people who are involved in the wrongdoing. So you can very anonymously raise a concern through our existing hotline and do so with great effect, because as soon as you do, it raises an investigation within the concern that you have in fact raised. We have a whole bunch of documents that people can study and get abreast with the different rules and regulations that one must follow, because many a times you do things without knowing that you're doing something wrong, because you don't know about the rules or restrictions that are applied to banking or the financial sector. We also conduct strategic monitoring, which is post-event, to ensure that all the dealings that we have in fact taken part in or are a part of are in line or in compliance with the different restrictions, the different regulations that govern banking within Asia Pacific and beyond. So thus far, when it comes to the fourth and fifth control failures that we identified, we did not identify any gaps, but again, we might again do so during audit next year, right, Roy? All right, perfect. If we can move on to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the most softer approaches to preventing financial crime within our organization. Let's talk about synergies. Which team do you work in?
TDI.
TDI. Can you give me a more specific team within
Regulatory cross-border.
Okay. What about you, Pradeep?
TDI infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Then Yunting, what about you?
Cash product.
Cash products. What about you?
TDI
Oh, yeah, you work under him, right? Fair enough. Cool. Do you guys know what you do on a day-to-day basis? Can you tell me exactly what Yunting does under cash product?
Not really aware of.
Not really. What about you, Huyen? Do you know what Roshan does on a day-to-day basis? The truth is that a lot of us don't know what we actually do for work. In fact, many people would have misunderstood me as a professional Toastmaster as opposed to an AFC professional, because I seem to be occupying stages and speaking out of my behind more often than actually sitting on the table and doing all of the monitoring I'm supposed to do. And the reason why I'm cracking that very lame dad joke is because this lack of knowledge or this lack of understanding that there are resources or teams dedicated to performing certain functions is when we fall through the gaps. Which is why it's important to establish synergies, not just within control functions, but also between control functions and the wider business, so that we can collaborate together to make money and make money ethically. Correct? It's all about the mindset. It's all about knowing that there are different ways of cutting the same fruit. Jolo might not be a client today, but he might be a third party. What are the risks of a third party being onboarded versus a client? How can a third party influence a particular piece of business that ordinarily a client would be able to do so? So again, people who want to commit crime find different guises to commit that crime in. And having that knowledge by coordinating with the different departments within a given banking operation, one can in fact control such risks. Building alliances with bank leadership. Now this might sound weird and might sound unscrupulous, but the meaning behind this statement is making sure that you're working with top bank leaders in the big transactions or deals that they're working on as a control function helps ensuring that this approach towards managing risk is very collaborative, that you have your eyes on the ball. You're not just simply rotating paper or emails, but you're actually talking to them through the deal about what are the different nuances behind those transactions, who are involved, so on and so forth. That business know-how helps compliance identify risks that they previously did not identify, because we are not actually involved in the transactions, so we don't necessarily understand how those conversations, how those dealings go. Finally, taking risk management beyond a checklist. We have KODs and SOPs for almost everything. In fact, if we don't have one for a given process, you are tasked to do so. But the truth is that they are just the starting point towards a lot of the work that we do as a banking operation. We have to ensure that beyond the different check boxes that we tick when we are in fact controlling for risk or starting new transactions, we are also looking at each and every transaction, each and every dealing in isolation, because no two transactions are the same. Today, sitting in Singapore, I might give you a gift worth 60, 70, or 80 euros. For you, that might be a small amount. But that same 80, 90 euro gift to, say, someone sitting in Indonesia with a much weaker currency, where that same amount of money can buy a lot more, might actually mean something very different. So it's important to look at risk beyond a particular checklist or beyond a particular checkbox, because only when you have that mindset can you better manage the risk that in fact arrives on your shores. So these are the different learnings that I took on after the 1MDB scandal. And I go back to that same point. Why are we managing risk? At the end of the day, the business might think we're just a roadblock, a cost center, someone who's just impeding the growth of the bank or its revenue generation. But the truth is, our unscrupulous behavior or our involvement in such shady behavior has real world consequences. $5.9 billion is a lot of money. It's money that can not just change one life, but many, many lives. And in making sure that we conduct ourselves ethically, making sure that our partners, our agents conduct themselves ethically, we can literally be changing lives. So please think of it in that capacity, with that frame of mind. And even though I can't necessarily turn around the clock, what we can do is ensuring that we secure our future by learning from the past and paying it forward for future bankers and future colleagues who will then enter an organization that has a robust culture of managing risk or behaving ethically. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this very, very long talk on 1MDB. Thank you.